President. Madam President, I hope we are moving to votes on this bill, to votes on our no Washington exemption language. So I certainly continue to encourage that and continue to support that. And the reason that's important, particularly on this no Washington exemption language, is because unless we act on October 1st, what I think is a completely illegal rule from the Obama administration that does create a special Washington exemption will go into effect. And Madam President, first of all, I think it's very, very unfortunate, sure is frustrating, that I and others have to be here on the floor blocking an illegal rule in the first place. Because you see, on this point, Obamacare is clear. The actual statutory language of Obamacare says clearly that all members of Congress and their congressional staff go to the exchange. It's crystal clear about that, all of us. And in another section, section 1512, it also says clear that any folks going to the exchange, they lose their employer-based subsidy. That is crystal clear. Chuck Grassley, our distinguished colleague, authored this provision, and he couldn't have been more clear about where he was coming from, about the intent. He said at the time, quote, "The more that Congress experiences the laws it passes, the better," close quote. He's exactly right. That's what this is all about. That's what that provision is all about. And legal experts like David Ermer, a lawyer who's represented insurers, including in the federal employee program for 30 years, said clearly, quote, "I don't think members of Congress and their staff can get funds for coverage in the exchanges under existing law," close quote. That is very, very clear, particularly from the precise language of the Obamacare statute. So it's pretty darn frustrating that my colleagues and I, who are pushing this no Washington exemption language, have to be here doing this to begin with. It's all because of an illegal rule to bail out Congress, to create out of thin air a Washington exemption that will go into effect unless we act October 1st. So that's why we must act. That's why we must vote in a timely way. Now, this illegal rule, the first thing it says is we don't know what staff are covered or not, so we're going to leave it up to each individual member of Congress to even decide what, if any, of their staff have to go to the exchange. Now, Madam President, that is a ludicrous interpretation of the clear statutory language. It's ludicrous on its face because that language says all official staff. Secondly, and even more outrageous in my opinion, this illegal rule says whoever does go to the exchange from Congress, from staff, gets this very, very generous taxpayer-funded subsidy transferred from the federal employee health benefits plan, which we're leaving, to the exchange. Well, where did that come from? That's not in Obamacare. In fact, Section 1512 of Obamacare says exactly the opposite with regard to all employer-based contributions. So where did that come from? It came out of thin air, and it came out of intense lobbying to have President Obama create this special Washington exemption. And so I urge all of my colleagues to do the right thing and say, you know what? The first most basic rule of democracy is that we should be treated the same as America under the laws we pass. And that should be true across the board, certainly including Obamacare. Madam President, that's why the Heritage Foundation recently said, quote, "Obama's action to benefit the political class is the latest example of this administration doing whatever it wants, regardless of whether it has the authority to do so. The Office of Personnel Management overstepped its authority when it carried out the president's request to exempt Congress from the requirements of the health care law. Changing laws is the responsibility of the legislative branch, not the executive, quote. And they also said, quote, millions of Americans are going to be losing their existing coverage and paying more for health insurance. Under the Vitter Amendment, so would the Obama administration's appointees, Congress, and congressional staff. They baked that cake, now they can eat it too, close quote. Similarly, National Review said recently, quote, most employment lawyers interpreted that, meaning the Obamacare language, to mean that the taxpayer-funded federal health insurance subsidies dispensed to those on Congress's payroll, which now range from $5,000 to $11,000 a year, would have to end. And a little later, in the same opinion piece, they wrote, under behind-the-scenes pressure from members of Congress in both parties, President Obama used the quiet of the August recess to personally order the Office of Personnel Management, which supervises federal employment issues, to interpret the law so as to retain the generous congressional benefits, close quote. Wall Street Journal has also weighed in. I think they're right, quote, the issue is the White House's recent Obamacare bailout for members of Congress and their staffs. If Republicans want to show that they stand for something, this is it. If they really are willing to do whatever it takes to oppose this law, there should be no more meaningful way to prove it, close quote. As I said, the author of this original provision of Obamacare made it perfectly clear where he was coming from. That's our distinguished colleague, Chuck Grassley. Quote, the more that Congress experiences the laws it passes, the better, close quote. And the distinguished lawyer regarding this area of law, David Ermer, also said it's clear, quote, I don't think members of Congress and their staff can get funds for coverage in the exchanges under existing law, close quote. So, Madam President, that's why we have to act and have to vote before October 1st. Finally, in closing, let me just say I want to be very direct and ask members and the public to beware of another approach to defeating this no Washington exemption language. And that approach is pretty clever and it's pretty cynical. And that approach is to say, oh, this is a great idea, but we actually need to expand this to all federal employees. And there are members promoting this approach, particularly on the Republican side. Madam President, that will have one effect and one effect only. It will help ensure absolutely no ifs, ands, or buts that my language doesn't pass or that language doesn't pass. In fact, one of the main Republican proponents of this language said in a meeting which I attended, this will be perfect because under that scenario, under that language, all Republicans can vote yes, all Democrats will vote no, and it'll be killed and we'll keep the subsidy. So that's the game, that's the point, that's what's going on. We need a straight up or down vote on this no Washington exemption language, which is filed as an amendment to this bill on the floor, which is filed as a separate bill. And I very much look forward to that before October 1st. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Utah.
Madam President.